Soviet armor crossed Afghanistan in December 1979. Moscow came to prop up the communist government. Instead, it turned a local revolt into a wider war. Dust hung over winter roads. The first months locked the country into a conflict that would not stay local. The resistance was the Mujahideen, a loose mix of Islamic fighters. The United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and China backed them. Washington sent billions of dollars in weapons. Stinger missiles brought down Soviet aircraft, and the air war grew costlier for Moscow. By February 1989, the Soviets pulled out. Afghanistan was left in ruins. About 1.5 million Afghans were dead. Millions more had fled into Pakistan and Iran. Out of that collapse, the Taliban first emerged in the early 1990s.
The fall of the Soviets did not bring peace. In the early 1990s, rival Mujahideen factions bombed cities and killed thousands of civilians. Warlords carved up districts, ruling through force and corruption. Kidnapping, robbery, and rape became routine, and ordinary Afghans suffered most.
Out of the madrasas and the roads of southern Afghanistan, the Taliban offered one answer: order after war. The word means students in Pashto. Their core came from young men trained in Islamic schools, and Mullah Muhammad Omar led them from Kandahar. He had fought as a mujahideen, lost an eye in battle, and wanted strict Islamic law. The rise was fast. In October 1994, they seized Kandahar, and war-weary Afghans welcomed them for discipline, anti-corruption promises, justice, and a plan to disarm the warlords and unite Afghanistan under their rule. Kandahar changed the flow. The Taliban now had routes, cash, and guns. Pakistan's ISI saw them as a way to steady Afghanistan and protect Pakistan's interests. Pakistan sent weapons, money, and training. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates backed them too. The effect was quick. By early 1995, they controlled much of southern Afghanistan. Then came Herat in September 1995, near the Iranian border. It was one of Afghanistan's largest cities and a key trading center. That push reached Kabul next. The capital was already a wreck, split by years of fighting between rival warlords. Burhanuddin Rabbani held the city through one Mujahideen faction, and Ahmad Shah Massoud served as his military commander. The Taliban brought superior numbers, then closed in for a final assault. On September 26, 1996, Massoud and his forces withdrew. The Taliban entered Kabul, declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and imposed their strict version of Islamic law. Then they went straight for Mohammad Najibullah, the former president living under United Nations protection. They dragged him from the UN compound, tortured him, and hanged him in public. Kabul stayed in Taliban hands. Massoud and his allies pulled back into northern Afghanistan and built the Northern Alliance. It became a resistance front, and it kept fighting for years. By the end of 1996, the Taliban controlled more than 3/4 of Afghanistan. Their rule was brutal, but many Afghans still saw it as less chaotic than the years before. The world noticed, but few countries moved. Afghanistan had a new regime, and it was already becoming infamous worldwide. Inside Afghanistan, the first orders came fast. Mullah Muhammad Omar named himself Amir al-Mu'minin, commander of the faithful, and power gathered in one hand. Afghanistan became the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The title changed, the grip did not loosen. Girls were pushed out of school after primary education. Women were barred from outside work, and they could not leave home freely. They also had to keep their voices low in public because the Taliban said men should not hear a woman's voice. The burqa is a full-body covering worn over clothing, and it left only a mesh screen at the eyes. Private life disappeared by decree.
The rules reached the street, the home, and the clinic door. The punishment came with whips and sticks. The Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice enforced the rules in the streets. Hospitals split along sex lines. Female doctors were banned from work, and male doctors could not treat women patients. The hospital door closed to them. Care vanished.
The verdict came fast. No real trial followed. Courts handed out extreme punishments without proper trials. Proof came after the sentence. Adultery meant stones. Victims were buried up to their chests and pelted until they died. Public executions moved into stadiums. In Kabul's Ghazi Stadium, every Friday after prayers brought executions and floggings. Thousands were forced to watch. People accused without real evidence were shot, hanged, or beaten to death. Those public punishments spread outward fast. The stadium was not for football anymore. The crowd saw punishment where games used to be. Men were kept in line through visible fear, and the arena turned into a stage for executions. Kites disappeared from the sky. Girls were kept out of school. Boys were allowed only religious classes. Men had to wear traditional clothes and grow long beards, and trimmed beards brought punishment. Control reached into dress, education, and the street. The pressure moved from people to stone. Then came Bamiyan. In March 2001, the Taliban blew up the Buddha statues with dynamite and artillery. One rose 55 meters, the other reached 38. Carved into cliffs in central Afghanistan, they had stood for more than 1,500 years, dating back to the 6th century. UNESCO, the United Nations, Iran, and Saudi Arabia all pleaded for the destruction to stop. The Taliban kept going for weeks. Afterward, the niches stayed empty. After Bamiyan, the Taliban chose a new course. They gave bin Laden shelter. In 1996, Sudan expelled him. He moved to Afghanistan. He had already fought with the Mujahideen during the Soviet-Afghan War. Then, the deal hardened. Bin Laden gave the Taliban money, weapons, and foreign fighters. Short shelter, big price. Al-Qaeda built training camps across Afghanistan. Those camps trained thousands of militants from many countries. Some later hit the United States and other states. On August 7, 1998, Al-Qaeda bombed 2 U.S. embassies. One was in Kenya, one was in Tanzania. 224 people died. More than 4,500 were wounded. The United States answered with missile strikes on Al-Qaeda bases in Afghanistan. The Taliban still refused to hand over bin Laden. After the Taliban refused to hand over bin Laden, 4 hijacked planes were already heading for their targets. On September 11, 2001, 19 Al-Qaeda terrorists led by Osama bin Laden carried out the deadliest attack on United States soil in history. 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City, and both towers collapsed in less than 2 hours. A third plane slammed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., while United Airlines Flight 93 headed for another target, possibly the White House or the United States Capitol. Passengers fought back. It went down in Pennsylvania. The targets were already set. Nearly 3,000 died. Washington moved first. It named Osama bin Laden. President George W. Bush gave the Taliban an ultimatum: hand over bin Laden, shut down Al-Qaeda, or face military action. The Taliban had sheltered bin Laden and his network in Afghanistan. The order was direct. Mullah Mohammed Omar refused. He demanded proof. He offered a trial in Afghanistan instead of extradition. No compromise followed. Washington rejected the offer outright. With talks dead, Washington moved to force. On October 7, 2001, the United States and its allies launched Operation Enduring Freedom. The campaign aimed to topple the Taliban and destroy Al-Qaeda bases in Afghanistan. American and British warplanes bombed Kabul, Kandahar, and Jalalabad. The cities flashed under fire. Military sites, training camps, and command centers took the blows. The Taliban had not prepared for modern warfare. Then the ground teams moved in. U.S. Special Forces and CIA officers worked with the Northern Alliance. The Afghan fighters had resisted Taliban rule for years. The Taliban had taken Kabul in 1996, and now the same city was slipping away. Kabul fell on November 13, 2001. The city emptied fast. Herat fell on November 12th. Kandahar fell on December 7th. By December 9th, the Taliban had lost Tora Bora, a mountain region near the Pakistan border. The collapse came faster than the planners expected. Mullah Omar and his commanders went underground. Many fighters slipped into Pakistan's tribal areas. With Kabul already fallen, the war moved to Bonn. The battlefield was no longer streets and airstrikes. In December 2001, world leaders met in Bonn, the former capital of West Germany. The Bonn Agreement created an interim Afghan government led by Hamid Karzai, a former anti-Taliban resistance leader. Washington and its allies believed the war was won, and Afghanistan was no longer a safe haven for al-Qaeda. The paper deal in Bonn changed the flag in Kabul. It did not break the Taliban. While US and NATO units trained the Afghan National Army, they pushed democratic elections and rebuilt roads. The other side used the pause. The Taliban shifted into Pakistan's tribal regions. Mullah Muhammad Omar and other leaders hid in Quetta, the capital of Baluchistan. There they rebuilt their command as the Quetta Shura. Islamabad denied helping them. Intelligence reports said parts of the military and intelligence agencies quietly backed the group because influence in Afghanistan still mattered. The war had simply found a second rear. By 2006, the fight had moved out of hiding and into open violence across the south. In Kabul, suicide bombings started. That tactic had been rare before. NATO convoys were hit, schools were destroyed. Officials, journalists, and educators were targeted. From 2007 to 2010, the Taliban carried out thousands of attacks, often with improvised explosive devices, and those bombs became the main cause of death for US and NATO troops. The bombs kept killing troops. Washington answered with more soldiers. By 2010, more than 100,000 American troops were in Afghanistan, the highest number since the war began. Obama ordered the surge, hoping to finish the Taliban. It did not work. Every time American and NATO units pushed them back, the Taliban slipped into Pakistan, regrouped, and came back stronger. The Afghan army, trained for years, still struggled to hold ground without American support. No clear end. The war dragged on and became America's longest. Taliban fighters kept attacking, expanding into rural areas and taxing local people to fund the fight. Thousands of American and NATO soldiers were killed, and more were wounded. By 2018, the war had cost more than $2 trillion and more than 240,000 people, including more than 70,000 Afghan civilians. After 17 years of fighting, Washington was already looking for an exit. Trump pushed for direct talks. He wanted diplomacy to end the war. The Taliban knew they held the stronger hand. They refused to sit with the Afghan government, calling it a puppet regime. They spoke only to US officials, and Afghanistan's government stayed outside the room. It was a bypass, not a settlement. The real fight stayed with foreign forces. In February 2020, after more than 18 months of talks, the US and the Taliban signed a deal in Doha, Qatar. Washington promised to pull out all troops by May 2021. In return, the Taliban promised not to attack US forces or let Afghanistan serve as a base for groups like al-Qaeda. They made no promise about the Afghan government. That gap mattered. After the signing, Taliban attacks on Afghan security forces intensified. More territory changed hands, and the government grew weaker. The collapse came fast. On 15 August, the Taliban entered Kabul almost without resistance. Ashraf Ghani fled the country and later surfaced in the United Arab Emirates. No government remained. The Taliban declared victory and announced the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan again. Then the airport filled. Thousands of Afghans rushed to Hamid Karzai International Airport, terrified of Taliban rule. Some clung to US military planes as they took off. They fell. Others stood behind barbed wire while Afghan mothers passed babies through to US soldiers. The runway became the last exit. Turbine noise, shouting, and crushed crowds turned evacuation into panic. Over 120,000 people were flown out in the following weeks, but many were left behind. On 26 August 2021, an ISIS-K suicide bomber hit the airport and killed 183 people. The blast killed 183. 13 were US soldiers. The evacuation kept moving. Washington answered with drone strikes. More than 170 Afghan civilians died too, and it became one of the deadliest days for American forces in over a decade. The last military plane left Afghanistan on August 30th, 2021.
With the last plane gone, the Taliban spoke about women's rights, education, and an inclusive government. The promise did not last. Weeks later, the rules hardened, then the bans returned. The old pattern came back through schools, universities, and aid work, where each new restriction cut deeper. By March 2022, girls were barred from school after 6th grade, making Afghanistan the only country in the world with that ban. In December 2022, women were pushed out of universities and blocked from NGO work, and freedom of speech disappeared too.
With speech already gone, the crackdown moved straight into the newsrooms and onto the street. Taliban closed independent news stations and arrested journalists. Critics were beaten, jailed, or killed. Public punishments returned, and accused criminals were executed in stadiums while families looked on in silence. Then the money stopped. The United States froze $7 billion in central bank assets. Aid dried up, businesses shut their doors, jobs disappeared, and markets went empty. By 2022, over 90% of Afghans did not have enough food. Most countries refused to recognize the Taliban government. No formal recognition came. Washington, Brussels, and the United Nations imposed sanctions, and they tied recognition to human rights and an inclusive government. Beijing and Moscow kept diplomatic ties. They wanted lithium, gold, and rare earth minerals. Sanctions held the gate. Recognition stayed blocked. Afghanistan remained outside broad international recognition too. Outside, the contacts stay limited. Inside, fear sets the rules. The Taliban is still in power. Women's rights are almost gone. The economy is in ruins, and terrorism still hangs over daily life. Many Afghans keep fleeing. Those who stay live under strict Taliban control. Kabul shows it plainly. Closed schools, empty markets, and families packing to leave. The group talks about peace, but its actions say otherwise. With no real opposition, it holds on for now. Many Afghans continue to leave, and the rest live under its grip.